President of Minnesota ASALAH, and I'd like to welcome you to our meeting. It's our effort to try and accommodate everyone, so please, we'll do our best. I'm delighted that we have so many guests and so many of our regular members for this special meeting that's focusing on the Black History Month theme, African Americans in the Vote. I want to begin by reading a proclamation from the city of Sarasota. Whereas Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in 1915 to create and disseminate knowledge about Black history, and whereas the organization founded by Dr. Woodson continues to build on his legacy and is now known as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, and whereas Dr. Woodson encouraged the organization of local branches committed to promoting, researching, preserving, interpreting, and disseminating information about Black life, history, and culture, and whereas Minnesota ASALAH, with a founding group of 15 members, has grown to be the largest branch in the national network with 380 members who are dedicated to expanding knowledge of local and global African American history through education and outreach, and whereas Dr. Woodson established Negro History Week in 1926 that subsequently became Black History Month, celebrated annually in February, and whereas the city of Sarasota appreciates the efforts of Minnesota ASALAH to inform citizens of Sarasota about the long and torturous efforts of African Americans to obtain equal voting rights through programming highlighting the 2020 Black History Month theme, African Americans in the Vote. Now, therefore, the City Commission of the City of Sarasota, Florida, and on behalf of the citizens of our community, take great pride in recognizing February 2020 as Black History Month, African Americans in the Vote, a month of special importance and worthy of the recognition of the citizens of the City of Sarasota. It's signed by the mayor and all of the commissioners, and we have the seal. So you should give yourselves a round of applause for that. Now it's my pleasure to introduce David Wilkins, who will be sort of overseeing our formal program, and he'll be introducing the guests and so forth. David.
Good morning, ASALAH. Good morning. Thank you, Jim. The mission of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History is to promote, research, preserve, interpret, and disseminate information on African American history, culture, and life to the global community. There is no more important information this year than voting. And therefore, we're offering this panel of esteemed scholars and community activists, and there will be a Q&A afterwards, but I'd ask you to hold your questions until we get to that point in the program. Because this information is so important, you're not surprised to know that the National ASALAH has selected African Americans and the Vote as the theme, the 2020 theme. And I'm going to read the opening passage from that material. You'll see some of it posted around the room. They've published materials for the schools. ASALAH has purchased several sets of these. I've given a couple to Susie Copeland, for example, to use in Bradenton. We've got a set here. So let me read this, and then we'll do the introductions of our panelists. The year 2020 marks the centennial of the 19th Amendment and the culmination of the women's suffrage movement. The year 2020 also marks the sesquicentennial of the 15th Amendment, 1870, and the right of black men to the ballot after the Civil War. The theme speaks, therefore, to the ongoing struggle on the part of both black men and black women for the right to vote. This theme has a rich and long history, which begins at the turn of the 19th century, i.e. the era of the early republic, with the state's passage of laws that democratized the vote of white men while disenfranchising free black men. Thus, even before the Civil War, black men petitioned their legislatures and the U.S. Congress seeking to be recognized as voters. Tensions between the abolitionist and women suffragists first surfaced in the aftermath of the Civil War, while black disenfranchisement laws in the late 19th and early 20th centuries undermined the guarantees of the 14th and 15th Amendments for the great majority of Southern blacks until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The important contribution of black suffragists occurred not only within the larger women's movement, but within the larger black voting rights movement. Through the voting rights campaigns and legal suits from the turn of the 20th century to the mid-1960s, African Americans made their voices heard as to the importance of the vote. Indeed, the fight for black voting rights continues in the courts today. The theme of the vote should also include the rise of black elected and appointed officials at the local and national levels, campaigns for equal rights legislation, as well as the role of blacks in traditional and alternative political parties. With that, let me introduce our esteemed panel to you, beginning with Ms. Florence Shelton Clark. She serves as the second vice president of the Manatee County Democratic Black Caucus and is active in several organizations, most of which she did not want me to list. But we will take note of the fact that she is a very active and dedicated member of our membership committee, which has been really active this year. Florence says that she's been politically active from an early age, which explains her passion for voter registration and education. She's a member of Bethlehem Baptist Church. Next to Florence, we have Dr. Lawrence A. Miller, better known by most of us as Larry. Dr. Miller is a former city manager for the city of Arcadia and a former assistant city manager for the city of Sarasota. He reminded me this morning, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're currently the chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party?
No.
Correct me.
No, I was the former chair of the Manatee County Democratic Party.
So you're available to be the chair. All right. Larry teaches American government, comparative.
My wife is not going to.
Shirley, I'm sorry. Comparative politics, international relationship at St. Petersburg College. He's also taught at the State College of Florida, Kaiser University, and the South Florida State College. He's a member of Gamma Xi Boule and Omega Psi Phi fraternities, and he's a member of the Sarasota African American Cultural Coalition Board of Directors. And then we have Ms. Susie Copeland. Ms. Copeland worked for 30 years as a fair housing coordinator, is an active member of Manatee Bridging the Gap, and has been active in several Manatee County organizations. She's lived in Manatee for almost 49 years, has 3 children, 1 grandchild, and will celebrate 50 years of marriage in April. And she's a member of the Church of Christ in Bradenton. And then last but certainly not least, is Henry Blyden, our moderator. Henry is a retired U.S. Army veteran. We know Henry as a dedicated community servant, a member of Kappa Alpha Psi, Gamma Xi Boule, the NAACP, ASALAH, and the Student Advisory Council, just to name a few. Henry's been recognized by many organizations for his contributions to our community and may best be known for his tireless efforts to bring Christmas to our community's children through his annual toy drive. Henry, please.
Thank you, David. And thank you all for coming out this morning. We were asked to put this program together by our esteemed president, Jim Stewart, and our program chair, Ms. Lois Watson. And I had to inform Jim this morning that after this, one of 2 things are going to have to happen. Either he's going to have to pay me, or I quit. But it's a pleasure, and I hope that what we bring to you today is informative. And we're going to start. We're not going to waste any time because we want to get things covered, and then, of course, we got to go on with our regular meeting. So, Ms. Copeland, Susie to me, we're going to start with you. You've been in this area and active for quite a few years. if you would please give us a brief history of the African American vote in Manatee and Sarasota counties.
Thank you, Henry. The black turnout in any presidential election, African Americans tend to be more active and more involved. Midterm, not so much. In Manatee County, we've got about 6 predominantly African American precincts. And to give you some information about, even though 2018 was considered midterm, Andrew Gillum for governor, he received 96.82% of the African American votes in Manatee County. That's even higher than what President Obama received when he first ran in 2008 and 2012. When I look at Sarasota, because in Manatee County, the demographics tend to be more concentrated areas as opposed to Sarasota. Sarasota is really spread out wide, and I think the largest precinct is 115, where you have a high concentration of African Americans. And so when we look at elections and the results of election, when you spread out like that, it's really hard to have an impact on election results. I'm not telling you guys to move to make it happen, but I do believe collectively, with the number of African Americans in Sarasota County, you can have a direct impact on voter turnout and election results because you're working collectively together. I grew up in Alabama. I'm originally from Alabama. And one of the things that I remember back in the 50s, the movement of voting 65, Civil Rights Voting Act, I remember people coming to our home and says, Mr. and Mrs. Baker, you need to vote for so-and-so because they're going to help black folks. And I think as we've progressed to the 21st century, I see a shift in what the community, African American community, experiencing now. We don't have that connectivity the way we should. And we don't all have to live in the same place, but we all should have the same mind, that we want to elect someone who best represents our values, and collectively, we need to get back to that block voting, is what I believe. In Sarasota County, there's 10,000 African American voters. Now, when you look at that, compared to 324,000, you're a very, very small number. You only make up 3.2% of the voting populace here in Sarasota County. So it's really going to be hard for us as a race to have a direct impact on state, perhaps, and national. Now, locally, because you're in a district, I think probably Newtown is probably in District 70, State House seat, and you can have a direct impact in who wins Sarasota County. But when you look at and even with the Senate and the House, because of the gerrymandering, that poses another issue. And you have to tell me when to stop, because I can keep going, okay?
Well, thank you.
All right.
And, well, Dr. Miller, since Susie has given us a little history, a little facts there, I'm going to ask you to tell us just a little bit and give us an idea of what the overall African-American turnout was like in 2016 for the presidential election, overall.
Overall, okay. Thank you. Picking up on what Susie just mentioned as far as voter turnout is concerned, you have to put this in the context of midterms and presidential elections, okay? Because usually during a presidential election, more people come out than during midterm. But in 2016, what happened is that the turnout, as far as African Americans are concerned, nationwide, was lower. It decreased for the first time in a long time, okay? And to give you an idea, my research comes from the Pew Research Organization. They say that black voter turnout rate declined for the first time in 20 years in a presidential election, falling to 59.6% in 2016 after reaching a record high of 66.6 in 2012, okay? Now, fast forward to 2018. 2018, and you can draw your own conclusions as to the reason why the voting went up even higher. There was a record turnout in 2018 for a midterm. To give you an idea, there was 137 million that voted in 2016 and 122 million in 2018. And if you look even before 2016, in 2014, it was a record low. Only 36% of the people came out in that midterm election, okay? So there are a lot of factors that go into that issue, obviously, in terms of Barack Obama being the president and people coming out and voting in 2008, it was high. Coming out in 2010, it went down in terms of the midterm. In 2012, it went back up, right? And then in 2014, it really went down. And what happened as far as that is concerned is that in 2014, after having, if you remember, in Barack Obama's first 2 years, he had a majority in both the House and the Senate, okay? Because of the low turnout in 2010, lost the House, okay? 2012, the Republicans were able to keep the House, right? But weren't able to get the Senate. But in 2014, both the House and the Senate, because of the low voter turnout, went Republican. Okay, so in 2016, you had more people in the white community coming out to vote. We make up altogether. When I say altogether, I'm talking about people of color. You have Asian, Hispanic, and African American, made up about 26% of the overall vote, okay? And so when you have a situation like that, where there is a contest that you're going to have people more motivated to come out to vote, you're going to get a higher turnout as far as the African American vote is concerned. So the thing here is in terms of moving forward, as we start talking about, I see you giving me the signal. If we're talking about moving forward, we have to think about voting our own interests, okay? It's not about who looks the best or is the most prolific in terms of speaking. It's what they bring in policy that align with your interests that you should look at in terms of making a decision is concerned. And if I may say one other thing before I turn it over. In America, we look more in terms of, if you look at the different surveys, it's about an economic issue. It's about whether people have jobs, whether their 401ks are in place, things of that nature, that determines as far as voting and motivation is concerned. But other countries, we're 25th on the list of developed nations in the world as far as voter turnout is concerned, out of 35, okay? Human development are issues that are more prevalent in those countries than you have here. And when I say human development, I'm talking about education as it pertains to literacy, numeration, polarity, whether you're able to come out and vote. How hard or easy is it for you to come out and vote? Those particular issues, infant mortality, we have one of the worst rates in the world here in the United States. All of these issues are human development issues that different countries take a more value as it pertains to who gets their vote, okay, as opposed to here in the United States, okay? And we need to change that paradigm, because if in the 21st century, what is going to be the real issue as far as quality of life and standard of living is concerned is how well educated your country is, period, okay? So with that, I'll...
Thank you, and I'm glad you went on as long as you did, because see, now I don't get a chance to ask very many more questions that I've had for you, because you already took the liberty and answered them. But
That's it for me, I can go.
but we're gonna keep things, not to keep it as lengthy. We want to inform people, but note that we are on a time schedule. Ms. Copeland, getting back to you, what do you feel propels black people to vote?
Well, I look at it in a number of ways. One of the main purposes is actually the candidate themselves. We look at Barack Obama, overflowing, just outpouring of support within the African American community. We had Andrew Gillum running for governor, outpouring. And even with Hillary Clinton, when she ran for president, she received in the black community, in some of the precincts, 80%. So because we're so small in number, it doesn't give us the push to take us over that line of winning elections. So that's one of the reasons. And the other is dealing with polling locations being closed. We had back in several years ago, our supervisor of election decided he wanted to close some precincts in the predominantly African American communities. And we were able to work with him. He was determined that he was going to close some of those precincts. One precinct in Palmetto, they were in presidential election, that was 96% turnout there. He wanted to close that under the pretense that there was something wrong with the phone system. And so we were able to work with him, convince him that we needed to keep a precinct open in the geographical area in Palmetto. We also were able to come to Bradenton. He closed one that's in the predominantly African American community. He moved that precinct over to 9th Street, which kind of removes you away from the African American community. And we were able to get one in this almost the center core of the black community in Bradenton, and that's Rogers United Memorial Church. And that is a predominantly black voting precinct. So we were able to accomplish that. We hated to see the polling locations being closed, but I do understand economics involved as well. When you have a precinct, you're paying for workers there. You're paying for the rental of the building. And when you have a 10, 20% turnout, economically, does it make sense? And so I'm looking at it from that perspective. So it's incumbent upon us, no matter what election it is. I don't care if it's for the dog catcher. We need to go to the polls. We need to have a turnout. We have to turn it out. We also have, whether they're black, white, Hispanic, as long as they speak to our issues, we're going to get out and vote. And we need to really, truly recruit some quality African-American candidates. You know, we have people jumping in the race, and as far as I'm concerned, they're not qualified. I'm just going to be real with you guys here. They are not in that position to win a countywide seat, and that's the reality. And so, and I've decided, you know, we work very hard in our communities, And I do work hard working to elect candidates, but I made a conscious decision. I'm not working for a candidate anymore that I don't believe in, that I don't believe express my values and what I believe in. I don't care whether they're Democrat or Republican. I'm sorry, I really don't, even though I'm a registered Democrat, But I'm not going to get out there and work unless you're addressing the issues that impact the African American community and that you have solutions. So there are a number of areas, Mr. Blyden, that prevent us, but we've got to get beyond that. I tell people when I'm out in the community, there were years ago, we could not vote, people of color. And I said, there were people who lost their lives in order to get me to the poll. And for me to sit down in an election is saying to that individual, I don't care what you did. It doesn't mean anything to me. And I take my vote, I take it very seriously. And I hope each of you will take it seriously too, because that is what life and blood was shed, injuries, in order to get people of color to the polls. So that's it.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Miller, you talked a little bit about how things were in 2016 and so forth, and what actually happened. Do you think that the same thing could happen again in 2020?
Oh, definitely the same thing could happen. Right now you have a fractured race with so many candidates running. So the potential is there. But I want to give you also an idea in terms of overall as far as the different generations as far as voting is concerned. Because you have the millennials, right? You got, and just so we're clear, the millennials are 18 to 31, okay? We have Generation X, which is 31 to 51, right? We have the baby boomers, who are 52 to 70, okay? All right? Some of y'all are saying that it's us, but some of y'all in this other category I got here too. It's called a traditionalist, the traditionalist generation, and that's those ages 71 and above, okay? Each one of them have a certain amount of percentage as far as voting is concerned. Millennials, they talk about, these are statistics from 2016 as far as the presidential election is concerned. The turnout went from 46.4% in 2012 to 50.8% in 2016. As far as the turnout is concerned in terms of Generation X, those from 36 to 51, the turnout was 62.6%, up from 61% in 2012. And then you have, the baby boomers went from 68.7, and it was basically flat because it went down a little bit in terms of 68.9 in 2012. And then a traditional generation, it was 70%, 70.1 in 2016 compared to 71.8 in 2012. So when you look at that as far as turnout is concerned, and this is getting back to Susie's issue also, politicians gravitate to those areas where they're going to get the most vote, okay? They're going to speak to the issues that are more prevalent to those who are going to come out and vote. Now, I teach a course in political science at St. Petersburg College, and I talked to some of the students about this particular phenomenon. And the issue comes up as far as younger students feel as though, and this may, in terms of the reason why Bernie Sanders is doing so well, they don't feel you're talking to their issues. They don't feel as far as, let's say, for example, the tuition that they have to pay to go to school, right? When they get out of school, the student loan that they have to pay off, okay? And whether you're talking to their issues, as opposed to those other politicians who may be talking about Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all those other different issues that may be more prevalent towards a more older generation. As you saw, as far as both traditional and baby boomers, they come out in terms of voting at a higher percentage than does millennials. And also the issue being that they're a little bit ticked off as far as, and which is not being talked about now. I mean, it was talked about when Barack Obama was president, but not so much while, what's his name again? Is president. I have a hard time even putting his name and president in the same sentence. But, yes, he is president. The thing in terms of the debt, right? The millennials feel you're putting on them all this debt that they're going to have to pay for, right? That in terms of these politicians, they're not speaking to at this issue. That's one of the reasons why in 2018, their voting percentage went up, because they want to see younger people in office talk about these particular issues that are important to them. So that issue is one thing. Another issue, as far as turnout is concerned, is the Voting Rights Act. Shelby versus Holder was a monumental case that dealt with.
Can I interrupt
bring it
you
back
a minute? Because I
still-
want you to speak directly a little later to the Voting Rights Act. Okay? Thank
Good.
you. I don't want you guys to think that I forgot Florence. There's no way I could forget Florence. And if you notice, we've even given her her own dedicated mic. Ms. Clark, I know that your biggest concentration is on voter registration. My question for you is, since Amendment number 4 passed, which restored the right of returning citizens, former felons, to vote, why is it important that they vote, and what challenges have you faced in registering them to vote?
Well, thank you, Henry, for finally getting to me. I'm joking. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to be here. Yes, my passion is voter registration, and I think there's probably very few people in here that I haven't asked, could you please help me register somebody to vote? I do it, not just me, but I'm part of the Manatee County Democratic Black Caucus, and our initiative is to register returning citizens or former felons. And we've decided to take a stand and register voters Monday through Saturday, if we possibly can. And we do that because we want to get all of these, everybody that we can reach, we want to reach them. So what we have decided to do is we do target and focus on the returning citizens. We've got stationary locations that we go to and register them, but to let them know that their vote counts, that it's important that we get their vote, that they are a citizen now and their rights have been restored. One of the challenges that we've had is to get them to understand that their vote counts, that we're not working for the government. We're not trying to put them back into the system. And you'd be surprised the number of people that think that we're just trying to collect this information so that we can put them back into the system. Another thing is to get them to understand not only that their vote counts, but if they do not vote, like Susie said, basically we've squandered what someone else has fought and died and bled for them. So challenges is to get them to see that and know that it's still happening. It's real. The struggle is still there, and they do matter. Their vote counts.
Sticking with you, because I don't want anybody to say that I ignored you. What follow-up process do you have in place for returning citizens after you've registered them to vote?
That's a good question. Now, because I am with the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party registers people, but they don't tend to go out and follow up after we register people. And that's something that we realize that has to be done, because just to register a person and get that information and put it in the system does absolutely nothing. So what we've decided to do is we will contact, we collect the information and we contact these people. We call them and we make sure that they've gotten their voter registration card. We call them to make sure that they know that there are elections that are coming up. But the one thing that we have run into, because we've been holding phone banks, and I'll be asking some of you also to do the same thing. Come and just follow up with us, make phone calls to call these returning citizens to see if they've received their information. But some of them are actually registered. They're in the system, but they have no way of knowing it because they didn't get a voter registration card. And we find that that's prevalent. So I have mentioned it to, several people to do some follow-up with it, but they wouldn't know to vote because they haven't gotten a card, so they don't know that they're registered. So what we are trying to do is to make certain that we call them. Even if they don't have the card, we let them know that you don't need a card to register. However, we will give them their voter registration ID number. We'll give them the information as far as when they were registered. And then we tell them, just take your ID. We educate them as far as the ballot is concerned, sample ballot. We also tell them where their voter registration or where their polling location is. And if they have questions, we help them with that. But what I think is most important is that they know that they're registered and they can vote. And you'd be surprised at the joy that you hear over the phone when we tell them, you're actually in the system, you're registered, and they're so excited. So that is one of the main reasons that we are doing the follow-up, to make sure that they know that they are registered and that they can vote.
Thank you. And yes, I can agree to them disseminating the sample ballots, because I just stopped by to visit and they give me one and say, can you get 100 copies of these made? And they got me running all over Manatee County, but it's well worth it. Getting back to you, Ms. Copeland, does one vote, and I heard your passion, and I know how you feel, and you and I've spoken several times, but does one vote really matter in today's election? And if so, what can we do locally to ensure that every African American voter votes in 2020?
One of the things we can do is, like Florence said, the Black Caucus, we're out registering individuals, and there's the follow-up with them to ensure that they are prepared to go, whether it's early voting or go to their precinct polling location. I did the recount in 2018, and I discovered that people really don't even know how to complete a ballot. That was troubling to me when you've got the instructions on there, and they were just drawing a line down, going through the person's name, little check mark. It was just amazing. And so part of what the Black Caucus is doing, we wanted to include an educational component, because I believe that when people understand the importance of voting and why they should vote, we don't have to reach out to them ever again, because they know why they should vote. One vote does matter. My vote does matter. Your vote does matter. Charles Smith won the county commissioner race in Manatee County by 6 votes. And there are, all across this country, there are elections won by 10 votes, 3 votes, 20 votes. So your vote does count. We do encounter a lot of people, a lot of our voter registrants that we try to register, citizens that we try to register. My vote doesn't count. And so we have to go through this process of educating them why it's important to vote. And so we do that when we get those responses. And I wanted to say, seniors don't have a problem going to the polls. When we look at the numbers, seniors tend to go out and vote. it's that younger generation that is not accessing the polls. So we have a problem, that gap is there. And we have a lot of, especially when we were out, they don't even want you to come up to them talking about, would you like to register to vote? Oh, I don't do that anymore. I've knocked on doors and says, I don't get involved with that. And I tell them, I said, everything in your life, a politician is involved. How much property tax you pay, your water bill, your light bill. So a politician is involved. I mean, I say you're not officially born until a politician signs off on your birth certificate. You're not officially dead till a politician signs off on your death certificate. So that's how important it is, and they can't take it lightly. So the key, Henry, is really education. And when people understand the importance of it, we're going to be a better people, a better community, and great voters in the future if we can get the message out and tell people that.
Thank you. Getting back to you, Dr. Miller, I know that you're a student of voter rights. Tell us, if you will, what impact, if any, has the ruling of the Supreme Court had on our Voters' Rights Act and voter suppression efforts by state actors?
Yes, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And just to follow up on what Susie mentioned as far as politicians and the Supreme Court and what have you, between that, being born and dying, there are a whole host of different things that impact your life as far as politics are concerned. I was thinking about, as she was speaking, as far as a 6-year-old who was arrested in school, okay, in school, right, because she had a tantrum, okay, and the police officer who arrested her, while she was crying and what have you, he was violating the policies of that particular sheriff's department, okay? Because you're supposed to call your supervisor and get permission to be able to go ahead and arrest a person under 12 years of age, okay, in that county. And who makes up these different rules and regulations gets back to those politicians. So when you don't vote, certain people get in and boom, this is the kind of thing that happens. People look at me strange sometimes when I say I was the city manager for the city of Arcadia. And if you've been in Florida for a while, you know I'm not going to say anything wrong about Arcadia, but you know Arcadia, right? Okay. So you wonder how could that happen? Well, there were 3 African Americans who were on and you say that, people are like, how can that possibly be? But in the city of Arcadia, there is a majority of African Americans who are able to vote, right? And they voted for 3 out of the 5. Okay, getting back to the question, as far as the Supreme Court is concerned and voting rights, and I had mentioned about Shelby County versus Holder. The situation there is that in the Voting Rights Act, the Department of Justice had the ability to go ahead and, before an election took place, preclude certain actions taken by a county or a state as it relates to the voting rights. It's basically in the South. It's talked about, they had a long-term history of voter suppression in those areas. Poll taxes, grandfather clause, all these other different mechanisms that were used to keep African Americans from being able to vote. And so when the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, this put all that asunder, put that to the side, okay? Now, fast forward to, when was this? Let's just say 2000. Anyway, let's say 2000. I can't give you the exact date as far as it's concerned, but Shelby versus Holder changed that paradigm, and now, as far as that is concerned, they do not have to do that. So a whole flood of voter suppression laws started to come in. And when you think about, like Pennsylvania, where Trump won by 100,000 votes or so, right? And you have a suppression of people being able to come out and vote, a person like him could win in a state that had been traditionally Democratic, okay? So these are the type of things that we have to be concerned about, because going forward, not only do you have it in Texas, you have it in Wisconsin, you have it in North Carolina. It was so egregious in North Carolina when they went to court. The judges came out and said, y'all did this because the black people, you didn't want them to come out and vote. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he was saying. Okay? Surgically deleted, yes. So here it is in 2020. We're still fighting this battle, okay? Because when you start talking about, as far as voting is concerned, people understand the changing demographics of this country. And I mentioned to you about the 26% in terms of people of color. Think about that going forward, okay? What that's going to mean in terms of changing the dynamics. Texas is on the cusp, okay? Virginia is already gone that way in terms of turning blue. You have, even in terms of North Carolina and Wisconsin, you have these different issues as far as going from a red state to a blue state, and understanding that that blue state has a more diverse electorate in terms of people. So it's very important to understand that particular issue. And getting back to the Supreme Court, just by a show of hands, does anybody, in terms of the number of people on the Supreme Court, is it mandatory based upon the Constitution to have 9 members? Good, good, good. I'm happy to I got some educated consumers here. No, in the history of the United States, there have been more than 9 and less than 9, okay? Obviously, in terms of when Merrick Garland was kept out from being able to be, he was nominated, but he was not, no vote was taken revolving around him. So that, when Anthony Scalia died, had an opening that Obama could go ahead and have a justice. So it's very important in terms of coming out and voting, because now the judiciary, as far as Trump is concerned, he's gotten, in his first 2 years, he got more judges than what Obama had in his whole 8. Okay? So it's very important that we come out and vote and make sure that the type of people that we get into office make the decision, because one of the things in terms of 2020, everybody's looking at the presidential. People don't look at the Senate, okay? And the Senate, it may be even more important than the presidential, okay? So if you got friends in states like Arizona and Kentucky, yes, and these other different states, okay, Alabama and what have you, please contact them and tell them to get out and vote as far as these different candidates are concerned, because we definitely need a Supreme Court that reflects more of what this country looks like, okay? And this country is changing demographically, and when we have to acknowledge that going forward.
Thank you very much. Getting back to you, Ms. Clark, I know you spoke about returning citizens, but tell us just a little bit about ordinary people. What challenges are you having with just the ordinary, everyday guy or girl on the street, getting them registered? And you may even want to let the folks in the audience know what they can do to help you.
Okay, well, returning citizens were my focus because there are 1.4 million out there. And if we can get at least half of them registered and get them to the polls, they would make a difference in the outcome of the elections here. Regular people, just ordinary people, like Susie said, because we're out there every day, and many of them are saying that they don't feel that their vote counts. We don't address the issues, so they're not going to vote, and that's constant. So it's almost like we have to have talking points to let these people know that, you know, and sometimes it almost sounds like I'm the mother, the father, and sounds like I'm begging them. But I had to, at one point, I had to get this guy, I had to go by his house and get him to sign off on his voter registration form because he completed, but he didn't sign it. So, of course, we couldn't turn it in. So when I I called him and I said, you know, I need for you to do this. He said, you know what, I'm so tired of this, I don't want to be bothered. And I said, you know what, we need your vote. We need you. I said, so I need for you to sign this form and I need for you to do what has to be done because we need your vote. And he said, okay, you can come over around 10 o'clock. And that's the kind of stuff that we have to deal with. So I'm just saying, all of us have children, we have relatives, we have friends, and everybody, if you got children, if you got teenagers, whatever, please talk to them about the importance of voting and let them know that, you know, if they want to change, there can't be a change unless they help to make this change come about. So we just need for everybody to vote.
And I can tell you, I can attest that, you know, she's a hard taskmaster. I would hate to be in Tommy's shoes when he gets his honey-do list. You know, it's been good so far, and I know we could probably carry this on all day, but we don't have all day. So right now we're gonna open it up to Q&As, and for those of you who have questions, and we're going to try to keep it to a minimum because, again, we are on a time schedule. Dave?
Great. Let's give the panel a hand. I see a couple of questions.
Morning. My name is Donald Reeves, and I have a couple questions. But before I get to them, I want to take exception with Larry's recategorization of people in age groups. I've been a baby boomer all my life, and now this morning I find out that I'm in a different group. Anyway, the question I'm going to ask, I ask it in the spirit of critical inquiry, not to be critical of any particular political party. But on National Public Radio a couple days ago, there was an interesting discussion which could eventually become a strategy of one party or the other. And the theme was how the Democratic Party has taken the black vote for granted. And should African Americans give serious consideration to aligning themselves with the Republican Party? And the argument went that if you look across a whole array of economic indicators, housing status, education status, et cetera, that you might not be better off today than you were under previous administrations and in previous years. Now, this morning I've heard people say, vote your interest. Well, does your interest lie 100% with one party? And if you do vote your interest, then you lose the block that you bring. And I'd just like to hear your thoughts about that.
Dr. Miller?
I believe in voting as far as your interests are concerned, okay? You mentioned as far as the Democratic and Republican parties. I don't want to be taken for granted by the Democratic Party, and I don't want to be ignored by the Republican Party. So I'm looking to, as far as histories, as far as parties are concerned, and where they are today, as far as do they speak to my particular interests, okay? Because years ago, people would have been Republicans, okay? So things change. And as far as the Democratic Party is concerned, I don't think you look at it as far as a party is concerned, it's more of the individual. The individual who is running for office. We have people who run in primaries. You get an opportunity to look at all of what those different candidates who want to be, as Susie was mentioning about Gillum, you had Gwen Graham, who was running, and a number of other different people in the primary. And you decided who was of your best interest that you would send into the fray with the other party as far as the governorship is concerned. So the thing here is that if that candidate is speaking to your interests, about your family, I go my family, my community, the nation, okay? Because if I can't take care of my family, and I don't hear anything coming from this person about that, then why would I vote for that individual? Second, my community, what's going on in my community? How am I interacting and living with other people? How are they getting along as far as their families are concerned? And then this nation as a whole, okay? What are some of the things that are being said?
I'm conflicted as a voter, and then also when out and speaking to the millennials, I hear them saying they listen to what the candidates say, and they address the issues that they're looking for at. But then once they get in office, things changed. And they're saying they're tired of this happening over and over again, that when they run as a candidate, they say one thing, but when they get into office, something else happens. So, I mean, I know of one young lady who is very influential in Manatee County who has a Facebook page, and she's saying that she's not going to vote because she's tired of candidates saying one thing when they're running, and then once they get in office, something else happens. And then the other thing, briefly, is I'm surprised no one addressed the money in politics.
Florence, do you want to take it?
I don't know who the person is, but yeah, but I still say that it's important that all of us vote. And when I hear comments like that, we have to go down, and I always do this. I keep this with me, and this talks about the values of the two parties. And when you talk to them about the values and who's doing more for you and who is looking at what you've accomplished and who's trying to take back what you've accomplished, that right there helps me to make my decision. And when I'm out there, we get comments like that, but that's something they've got to hold the candidates' feet to the fire when they get in office, and if they switch from what they said to get elected and they're doing something totally different, then that's them to hold the candidates' feet to the fire, and that's what you do. And you got to do something to get them out if they didn't do what they said they were going to do when they got in there. Vote them out.
Thank you, folks. Sherry's going to give us a very concise, crisp question right now.
Yes, good morning. For the returning citizens, I've heard information that the government was trying to make them repay their debt as a deterrent or as a way to keep them from actually exercising their right to vote. Is that affecting people in this community?
It is. It's what we've come across is, when Amendment 4 passed, that was not part of it, but then there was it was voted. The Republicans decided to challenge it and want to make sure that people pay their fees and their fines if they have not done that in order to register, to even register to vote. So what we've been told is, just recently there was a ruling that they cannot hold that against the person. However, that ruling came after the deadline to register to vote, so it doesn't do anything right now. But what we continue to do as Democratic Black Caucus is we continue to register, because you still have an election coming up in August. So hopefully with the FRRC, which is the Florida Rights and Restoration Coalition, they are helping to pay the fines and fees of the returning citizens. So if you run into anyone, if you encounter someone that has a situation where they still owe fees or fines, we're asking that you refer them to the FRRC, and this way they can get the pays fine. Once they get the pays fines, we can go ahead and register them, and they can vote. It's just that simple.
All right, one more question from over here, to be fair to the room.
My name is Rita Smith, and I'm actually a clerk at my precinct. And I wanted to say to Florence, while you're out registering people, make sure that to let them know, I know those returning citizens tend to be kind of mobile, to let them know if they change their address, to let the supervisory elections know. A lot of times there are people running in at 6:45, can't vote at the precinct because, they aren't in that precinct. So then they don't have time to go to their precinct to vote.
We try and get them to update and stay informed with us. Many of them are homeless, and that's what's unfortunate also. So we try and ask them to, if they need to make changes, do it through the Supervisor of Elections office. Thanks for that comment.
Can I just get back to what Alan Heath mentioned as far as money is concerned in politics? Because you're right, it has a tremendous impact upon candidates as far as running for election is concerned. And the thing here is that Citizens United, that Supreme Court case was terrible as it relates to money flooding into our presidential elections. And so that's what you're up against as far as that is concerned. And it takes billions of dollars now to run for president of the United States. And you used to have on your 1040 form, that little thing that you checked on the box about and now candidates don't even pay that any mind. I mean, in terms of getting presidential money, matching funds as far as their campaigns are concerned. So that tells you where we are, and it's very hard to get money out of politics, period. But one thing that you can do, and that gets back to what Florence was mentioning, in terms of getting people out there to vote. Because once we are able to get the right people in there, then we'll be able to go ahead and get good people in the judiciary who won't come up with these kinds of rulings that put, corporations as if they are people in charge of these different elections.
Well, I know we could go on all day, and I haven't been really a stickler for time with your questions, but I'm getting a little sticky because I'm going to ask you each to give us a 30-second snippet of what you feel as an action statement before we close. Ms. Clark?
I'd just like to say that I am a member of ASALAH, and I've been here about 3.5 years, and I've been a member for about 3 years, and I've always been active with voter registration, and I'm asking you guys to help me out. We need people, we need boots on the ground. We need people to come out and help us get these people registered so that we can get them to the polls and make a change. So if you could if you see me, I'm everywhere. That's the comment. If you see me, and if you're willing to help, I'd appreciate your help. Thank you.
Dr. Miller?
I say each one, reach one. Do not go to the polls by yourself. Take somebody with you. I don't care if they're kicking and screaming and talking about what they got to do today and all that. You make sure that they know that you're going to be on them about going out to vote. Every day, when they start talking about early voting, say, did you go out and vote? Because repetition, think about this, politicians use repetition. You see commercials all the time on television about one candidate or another, so much so that you can, sing their jingle yourself, right? The thing here is that you have to be just as adamant about taking somebody to the polls yourself and getting the word out about, see, a lot of people don't know in terms of this issue as far as getting out when the early voting is, voting by mail, all these different issues, even though they get it in the mail from the supervisor of elections. So bring somebody with you, each one or each one.
Ms. Copeland?
Andrew, I just wanted to share some information. I think all of the comments have been very helpful and enlightening. One of the things that we're faced with in Manatee and Sarasota, a lot of our new voters are actually going independent or no party affiliate. So when you talk about party affiliation, Florida is a a closed primary state. So that's going to play a role in, we are out registering people to vote. You've got to be, and I said one or the other, you've got to be an R or a D. That's because in Florida, that's just the way it is. And so we have to, and I will say, I'm going to take defend my DNC because they are putting people of color in positions in the DNC. So, and that is something that needs to occur. Now, we've got to be mindful too that the largest growing voting population right now is the Hispanics, to be honest with you. And then you've got the others, unknown. We're lagging behind in terms of African Americans, but that population is, growing tremendously. And so I believe we should have to form a coalition with those Hispanics, and to make sure that we've got the power now, that voting power together. So together we can win it.
Thank you. You know, I'd like to thank our panel for today, Ms. Susie Copeland, Dr. Lawrence Miller, and my very special sister, Ms. Florence Selden Clark, and my sidekick. Can't forget David. David keeps me on track and for putting this program together. And being able to share our thoughts with you, and we hope it will be enlightening and informative to all in attendance. We will be around afterwards for any questions that were not answered. And if you have some time on your hands, we can also let you know how you can help. Thanks again to Minnesota ASALAH, our president, Dr. James Stewart, for hosting this program. And a hearty thank you to Charles Clapsaddle and his staff from METV for taping and rebroadcasting our program. I've heard it said that our people suffer for the lack of knowledge. So I say to you, those of us who can and have been around for a while, arm yourselves with knowledge. And don't be ashamed or don't be afraid to share it. Because if our young people don't know our history, it's not shame on them. It's shame on us. I'm Henry Blyden. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.